Okay, so yeah, thanks for the Kevin's and the others' presentations. I'm really excited to go back home and share this expert information, up-to-date information and analysis with my students. We work on these basins like Jordan, like Nile, and of course we are in Turkey. We focus on Euphrates and Tigris, but inevitably we compare with the Middle East, North Africa basins. And I'm really privileged to listen to the experts of these basins. And yeah, Euphrates and Tigris is another one, another significant one in terms of volume of water. And Neda was comparing with Jordan. Yeah, together Euphrates and Tigris makes like 80 billion in normal years, or maybe more than 80 billion cubic meters of water per year. But it was in history probably in normal years. Because it's under the significant impact of climate change in Mediterranean, and IPCC focuses and draws attention that this particular basin is losing water. In Tigris like 30%, in Euphrates like 25%. Snow is not at the right time, at the right place, and it's less snow in the mountains of Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. And it is coming earlier, and climate change is already happening, so it's not anymore 80 billion cubic meters. But compared to Jordan, yes, there is plenty of water. Can be comparable to the Nile Basin, not that much of geography in terms of square kilometers. Not many riparians, 4 major riparians, especially in the hydropolitical history. There were the Turkey, Syria, and Iraq changing the river system. And yeah, I will try to share with you the diplomacy in this region. In many publications or in journal or newspaper articles, this basin is always considered as a hotspot with full of political confrontations, even coming verge of war because of water sharing and power asymmetries. But I also observed in my research that the riparian states, the major ones, used water diplomacy. They preferred water diplomacy mechanisms. Like in general, it's claimed yesterday, keynote speech, that states prefer water diplomacy rather than waging war over water allocation at transboundary level. We always caution that this is interstate level. At sub-state level, local level, there is always has been the danger of engaging with conflict between the parties. And yeah, they preferred negotiations. It started with the large-scale dam development in Turkey and Syria. Iraq has been the user for thousands of years, and it can be comparable to Egypt. So Euphrates and Tigris are the only freshwater resources for Iraq. This is the only basins they have. And in Turkey, we have 25 basins. In Syria, 7 basins. But strategically, Euphrates-Tigris amounts to 1/3 of Turkey's freshwater supply, and there are ambitious plans on it to provide energy and agricultural development. And in Syria as well, there are 7 basins, but Euphrates is the major basin to provide agricultural development and energy through the major dam in Tabqa. Yeah, they preferred negotiations. Iraq was the most anxious party in the very downstream. Iraq asked for the information about the dams coming one after another in Turkey in the 1970s, about the construction of the dam, type of the dam, filling of the dam, operation of the dam. Like today, Egypt is anxious about Gerd Dam. And they met time to time, and at technical level, interesting meetings that I had a chance to read from the Central Water Agency. And the technical people were sharing knowledge about and they were visiting the fields of the dam construction in Turkey and Syria. And however, those bilateral negotiations or time-to-time trilateral negotiations, even if they opted for negotiations, it didn't end up with a basin-wide agreement. Because we know that in diplomacy, negotiations should have an objective, a sincere objective to end. It didn't end up with agreements at the Basin level, but I will talk about there are two defining bilateral water sharing agreements here. So it shows that diplomacy produced some agreements on bilateral level. When we talk about diplomacy, you know that there are direct negotiations, but that they may prefer third parties to settle the disputes as the water use increases. It happened here as well. Third parties are involved at some point, and especially the international agencies, Turkey's ally, World Bank and USAID provided credits for Turkey to build the first large-scale dam, Keban Dam, namely on Euphrates, and the second one coming, the credits come from World Bank. However, interestingly, Turkey stopped after using this experience of getting credits from these agencies involving the third parties, because there was a huge pressure on Turkey to let certain amount of water at the downstream of the dams at certain cubic meters in order to get the credits. And Turkey completed these two dams with these conditions. And after these two large-scale dams, Turkey continued to build the dams with the national budget in order not to involve the third parties. And we see also the mediation, and maybe we should be alert about hot conflict in history. There was a time in 1975, Syria and Iraq came to the brink of war, when Saddam sent his troops to Syrian border in order to threaten Syria about the issue of not getting enough water from Syria, because the two dams in Turkey and Syria were constructed at the same time and filled in the same season, and it was a drought season, and the water reduced the intolerable levels in Iraq. And Saddam used this water problem as a pretext to threaten Syria, even sending the troops. But it was not a water crisis per se, because when we study politics of Middle East, we know that these two Ba'athist regimes in Iraq and Syria, they supposedly following the same ideology, but they were in severe political rivalry. And Saddam used it as a pretext to threaten Syria. That crisis was mediated. We can now consider it as a diplomatic crisis. It didn't turn into hot conflict by Saudi Arabia. So they use mediation time to time, but typically this region is open to direct negotiations rather than third-party involvement, simply because of the fact that the upstream riparian Turkey is not fond of third-party involvement with its experience in the past. So who are the actors? Yeah, in diplomacy is typically run by or conducted by states through bargaining, negotiations, and for a long time the bureaucracies and diplomats were the key actors, of course always ruled by the politicians. However, I observed in my research that they also evolved through the long time of on and off negotiations, and they contributed to the cooperative frameworks, learning from each other and using the opportunities of certain times of peace in the region. And they managed to reach some interesting agreements rather than sharing agreements. So we should pay attention to the role of technocrats and diplomats in the region. Of course, the role of academia and NGOs, they also started to be realized because it's a long time since 1960s. These transboundary relations are ongoing, and those stakeholders also gained experience in water management, but their role had been always minimal, however increased after the early 2000s. Yeah, I can observe in the region multi-track diplomacy, even though the region is politically volatile since 2003 at least, even before with the Iran-Iraq war and Iraq-Gulf war, sanctions on Iraq, and then the American invasion in Iraq. So it's a very politically volatile region with the recent Syrian crisis. However, we can see that this track 2 diplomacy especially tried to support track 1 during these volatile times, or use the opportunities of window of opportunity opened from 2000 to 2011 between especially Turkey and Syria, when the relations were very good, and when the regime change in Iraq brought the Iraqi technocrats and professionals to the more contact with Turkey and Syrian people. So we can see that the emergence of Track 2 initiatives. Some of them are active, some of them are dormant, like ETIC, which started in 2005 using the opportunity of Turkey-Syria rapprochement and Iraq's regime change. But it really tried to tackle with the crisis coming after another, especially Syrian crisis. But another one, like Track 1.5, Blue Peace in the Middle East, covers this region as well, sponsored by Switzerland development agencies, but very much owned by the region, and including also majorly Jordan, Lebanon, and to some extent Iran as well. And this is a Track 1.5 initiative, I say, because there are officials involved and sponsored by the governments. There are coordination offices since 2018. And also there are unofficial people like us, academia, and trying to bring the diplomacy initiatives like non-contentious issues, water management, efficiency, water, energy, food nexus projects. And they have offices in Jordan, Turkey, coordination offices, and quite a lot of support from the political level. So that multi-track water diplomacy is now a reality in the Euphrates-Tigris Basin, which I really enjoy a lot, because when I was doing my PhD, I was hardly convincing the jury members about the future of this possibility. And yeah, Nida was presenting today, and she's actually putting together a book, edited book, to understand the institutions in the Middle East river basins, major river basins, North Africa, Middle East basins. Yeah, I figure out and I find out institutions here that I really appreciate, because especially when I talk about water diplomacy, my expertise, as I say, there should be an end, sincere end. Creating institutions, surviving them, making them sustainable, effective, and so forth. They created at official level in 1980 with the demand of Iraq, Joint Technical Committee, bilateral one between Turkey, Iraq, to determine Iraq's demand was water sharing agreement. Turkey was in after of studying the river basin, then reaching an agreement. This was a very diverging point, but they agreed to establish it, and Syria joined in, and it became a trilateral body, and it is still officially alive. Whenever there's an opportunity at the highest level, it may convene again, and it convened several times between 2000 and 2011 when Syria was stabilized. And, well, the problem is that in Joint Technical Committee, they couldn't agree all through the years about the subject and the object of the negotiations. Turkey was insisting on that it is a single basin with Euphrates and Tigris, while Syria and Iraq joined in to ask their shares from the Euphrates. And, yeah, Turkey was insisting on a study of the river basin as a whole, then reaching an allocation agreement. Even the words were very tricky. Turkey was not using sharing agreement, but allocation. While Syria and Iraq wanted to focus on Euphrates, because the demands from Euphrates for agricultural purposes have been always more than Tigris, and they would like to know their shares from Euphrates before Turkey completed the large-scale project on the Euphrates. And they also reached during the Joint Technical Committee meetings, but apart from these meetings, at the highest political level, there are two agreements signed in this region. It's a deviation from typical water diplomacy which Turkey followed in Joint Technical Committee, because Turkey was insisting that the sharing or allocation agreement will come after determining the water and land resources, agricultural needs. But Turkey signed the agreement with Syria in 1987. This is an interim one, but still legally binding agreement, but Turkey promised half of the Euphrates flow to Syria. Why? This is the question that we always discuss in class. There were many reasons that Turkey signed this agreement, but of course it was a huge deviation from its water diplomacy practices. she tried to link the water agreement to security agreement, getting security guarantees from Syria, border security, stopping the support for terrorism. Turkey thought that she can exchange this benefit with water shares, but it never happened. Border security continued to be fragile, and this agreement became too much burden for Turkish engineers to guarantee this flow to Syria. And afterwards, a few years later, with the pressure of Iraq, Syria also agreed to share the Euphrates on percentages. You get the large share, Iraq get the 58% and Syria with 42%. Those two agreements are the product of diplomacy at the highest level, prime ministerial and presidential level. But I always heard from our interviews with technocrats and academics working on this issue that those are not manageable agreements with a variable resource, with increasing needs, and without touching the quality problems, without dealing with the environmental protection, dividing the river on cubic meters or percentages, didn't solve the problems. Neither of the countries are satisfied with the results. In 2000, between 2000 and 2011, there was a different period in the region when Turkey, Syria reached a rapprochement in many fields, not only water. Iraq was also opening up, and they used this opportunity, the technocrats, to sign new protocols about how to use and manage the river system. And they were the ones who were trying to coordinate the management of the river through the large-scale dams, unilaterally built and without coordination operated. So they tried to focus on how to deal with drought management, flood control still after too many dams, and quality management and environmental protection. So there are a series of protocols signed in 2009 concerned about not water sharing, but water management and use. And another institution which is still alive is the Blue Peace in the Middle East that I would like to emphasize. So we have this, we called in one of our publications with my graduate student that this is a region with imperfect peace. We borrowed this concept from a leading Spanish political scientist. We try to live in peace, but it's an imperfect peace, water peace. There are institutions at track 1 level, official level, unofficial level. There are bilateral treaties not solving the problems, like in Jordan Basin. There are track 2 initiatives, even track 1.5, officials and non-officials work together, but still it is imperfect because it's not a basin-wide, and it's a difficult basin, a large basin, and it's not considered as in this way. So in the midst of the crisis in Syria, Turkey and Iraq wanted to revitalize water diplomacy again, and it's an ongoing negotiations and cooperation, I can say, because still Turkey-Syria relations are not repaired. And so it's the ongoing diplomacy right now, trying to deal with the problems at the bilateral level and trying to broaden the agenda by using track 1 and track 2. You might have heard about it. So it's not always political confrontation. They are meeting often in Baghdad, Istanbul, to discuss about non-contentious issues. Track 2 and track 1.5 is supporting them. Last week, they were in Baghdad conference, the third one. And it is the conference that Iraq wants to show its role in global water diplomacy and its needs from the rivers. But it is very welcomes Turkey's partnership, and it's going on interestingly well. However, there are also objectives to institutionalize this bilateral level, and they are considering to build a water research center in Baghdad as an international organization, which can start with Turkey's, Iraq's engineers to work on joint dams on the border. This is an area which is considered as a cooperation area, which can be built on especially Tigris and river on the border. And there are also get cooperative initiatives to learn about more how to deal with the new dams in Turkey, the last component of the giant project, how to coordinate the management of this dam with another dam downstream, like the big dam, Musul Dam. Where to, I cannot guarantee. Where to, I am optimistic about that they continue on this level and they can welcome Syria whenever it is settled. But we know that there are ongoing problems in the region. The impact of climate change is drastic, and it is not very concretely considered in these initiatives. All the projects are very at the desk level or pilot level, so it's not seriously considered what will happen when the waters will really decrease 1/3, 2/3 levels coming from Turkey-Iraq mountains, and there are not serious projects or coordination efforts what to do with less water coming from Turkey and Iraq to Iraq, Syria, and from Iran as well. So it's a huge problem, and it's an ongoing problem. And another problem is it's still a destabilized region, and diplomacy efforts has to suffer in this imperfect peace. And my conclusion is that I still believe in institutions, and Joint Technical Committee had problems, but it is the important institution which brings together at the highest level the technocrats and politicians. So I believe it should be revitalized, and it should be involving multi-stakeholder platforms. And the memoranda, the protocols signed in 2009 and 2014 on bilateral level, they can be turned into multilateral level because they are quite promising in terms of dealing with how they manage their water resources, how they use their water resources, and hopefully stakeholders can be involved more regularly, track 2 or the other tracks, or civil society organizations in managing this river at transboundary level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Aysegül. Now we can take some questions.
Thank you very much for your talk. You do end by mentioning civil society organizations. I was wondering, is there an environmental awareness? Are there civil society organizations concerned with the environment in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey? And what is, if so, what is their degree of freedom? How much can they act?
There are ups and downs all the time. It all started, in Turkey, it all started with 1990s, and the focus was also on Euphrates, all Turkish environment and river basins, but was on the Euphrates as well. The UN Habitat Conference was really a push for environmental organizations to emerge in Turkey, and they are now very much experienced, and they work on Euphrates. When I was working for a very short time for this giant project for the government, we used to work with them to understand the impacts of these projects on the environment of Euphrates and Tigris rivers. So they are experienced. The representatives of WWF or the other national NGOs, they are really built knowledge and experience. In Iraq, with the regime change, you might have heard about it, the marshlands was the priority issue, and also the NGOs blossomed. The numbers were many, the significant ones like Nature Iraq and the others, they are also involved in these track 2 initiatives, track 1.5 and track 3. There is an experience. Syria was the most difficult case actually because regime change in Iraq brought many complexities and many problems, the invasion, but it really opened up the society a little bit. But Syria, we were hardly finding partners in Syria in terms of NGOs. But if a multilateral dialogue starts, there are experienced NGOs in all 3 countries, but they don't know how to work at transponder level. They will learn together.
Thanks for that. That was great. I have so much to learn about that area. I'm curious, the I assume Joint Technical Commission, do they have any data sharing or joint models or anything like that that's being exchanged? Is that a platform for that? Sort of one question. And then also, I think this last week there was some sort of conference in Baghdad,
Yeah.
And I'm curious how much participation from the other countries are actively in there, and does that include cooperation between academics within the countries?
Yeah. Baghdad conference is becoming a significant part of water diplomacy in the region. And it's good to see that Baghdad is inviting a really rich Turkish delegation all the time. And it's the third one, and of course they are organizing the conference, but Turkish delegation is a significant part of this conference, together with international agencies. Of course, Iraq is very fond of attracting the interest of international agencies through these conferences. Syria, unfortunately, Syria is not diplomatically involved, but there are experts from Syria living here and there in Turkey or in the States, or they also sometimes participate in these Track 2 initiatives, but to my knowledge, not in Baghdad. Joint technical committees, it's an interesting story. In the 60s and 70s, when this wasn't named as a permanent joint technical committee, but the technical negotiations were happening between Turkey, Iraq, time to time, trilateral level, they were sharing data and hydrological and meteorological data. But then this issue became more high politics issue, and also in the 1980s, the relations between Turkey and Syria worsened because of the rise of border security, terrorism issues. So water became another thorny issue with Syria, together with territorial border and water. So since the late 1980s, data sharing is a problem. But in the 2000s, the window of opportunity in the first decade, data sharing again found to be a point to start, but they wanted to start from in Track 1 and Track 2, harmonization and calibration of how to measure data first. So they tried to convince each other in Turkey, Iraq, and Syria that we should pick some measurement stations and learn from each other, because they believe that even the measurement styles, calibrations are different. So they would like to start from this way of how to measure data, and then maybe regularly exchanging data. Another thing is Turkey promised 500 cubic meter per second since 1987. So it brings data sharing, because Turkey has to provide this water monthly basis, and if she cannot do this at this particular month, she promises to provide it in the coming months. So there is some data sharing going on inevitably, because there is a binding agreement.
Thank you. I have two questions, one which is directed for you, and one which maybe you can't answer, but maybe you have more insight just from the region. So the big question, as someone from Turkey and talking about cooperation, is why should Turkey cooperate? Right? So Turkey is the bigger country, it's the biggest country, it's the richest country, has the biggest army, it's upstream, and it's part of NATO. Right? So Saddam Hussein could saber rattle all he wants, but it was never really a credible threat, right? And Turkey knew it wasn't a credible threat. And so the question is, other than sort of general goodwill, what incentives are there really for Turkey to cooperate or to coordinate with the downstream parties? So that's my big question. And then another question, which I don't know if you have any insight into, is they always talk about this as three countries, right? Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. Sometimes they'll talk about Iran as well, because of a little bit at the end. But it's really these three countries. But when you look at it, it's almost four countries, because Kurdistan is the Kurdish region in Iraq is sort of semi-autonomous. So are there agreements between the Kurdish autonomous region in Iraq and the downstream region of Iraq? Do you know of any sort of internal negotiations there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great questions. We always discuss this in classes. Students are very innovative in ideas. Yeah, Turkey has complex relations with southern neighbors, so it's not only water. One significant issue is Turkey, Iraq is very good trading partners, and it's Turkey is powerful compared to militarily, yeah, but it's also very fragile, and there's a very long border with Syria and Iraq, and it has to secure this border, and it's open to most of the time since 1980s a volatile border. So Turkey wants to have military cooperation, and during Saddam times they had tacit agreement, hot pursuit agreement, and it's still going on. Turkey follows the idea of cooperating with Iraq militarily, and also in trade and economic terms, they are complementary economies. When the time allows and the stability allows, the trade volume increases to billions of dollars immediately, because those are complementary economies, good neighbors. And in the border, and also through the production, complementary of the production, oil, food, the other goods that Turkey can provide to Iraq, and Iraq provided oil to Turkey. So Turkey finds it very strategically important to keep good relations with Iraq. And with Syria, it was more difficult, because there were historical thorny problems, like territorial problem, that Syria didn't recognize Turkish border in Hatay and so forth. And also since 1980s or even before, Turkey perceived that Armenian terrorism and Kurdish terrorism were sponsored by Syria. That was the strong perception of Turkish establishment. So it was more difficult to establish an incentive in Turkey to start cooperation with Syria. But another thing is that maybe Turkey sees this region like a economically cooperation region, like the project that Turkey was following and investing billions of dollars, the Southeast Anatolia project, was not only for our region or for the country, but for importing agricultural goods to the region. So stability and ways of using diplomacy became the norm for Turkey, for economic interests with Iraq, military interests with Iraq, and to some extent with economic interests with Syria. It was more difficult with Syria. The other question was, I forgot really. Yeah, Kurdish question. Yeah, it's a bit like in the first years of American invasion, or in the first decade, let's say, it's the 20th year now. We just sensed that, the Kurdish entity, regional government, could be a game changer in water diplomacy or water relations, but it didn't happen. Water diplomacy is ruled by Baghdad, and most of the water management is ruled by Baghdad. And they are not maybe in very good terms all the time, but the money, technology, technocrats, they all, it was the centralized water management for whole years of Baas regime, and so it continues like that. And the Kurdish region is not very active in water diplomacy, I can say.
Sure. I was going to actually originally ask a question about the wisdom of Baghdad being the facilitator for such things, but now I would actually turn around and make the question of why should Turkey cooperate? I think why shouldn't Turkey be actually the facilitators of such discussions? Because Turkey is is a place where the institutions are stronger, the university and the expertise level is higher, and it's a place where everybody wants to travel to. Not everybody will go to Baghdad, but if you have conferences in Istanbul or Ankara or Izmir, it will be a lot easier to draw from the region. It will be easier to bring Israeli experts and European experts into picture. I think Turkey is actually a natural facilitator for these kinds of discussions. And this sort of a traditional power equations of why should we concede because we have all the things on our side, is sort of almost like Erdogan-esque in mentality, and maybe with a shift in leadership in the near future, where this power of brokering deals in between these players, actually the soft power is going to be much more relevant, and Turkey could be in a really great position to be that facilitator.
Great comment.
Well, this is Mustafa Kibaroglu. Something as an analogy to your question as to whether the Kurdish region would have some relations with Turkey regarding the water issue. Actually, Turkey sold the Kurdish region's oil over the last decade and has been given to court by Baghdad, and they won just recently, and Turkey has to pay something around $4 billion fine for that. So Baghdad always considers itself the only authority with respect to international relations, and Kurdish region can do whatever they want to do inside Iraq, inside the Kurdish region, but no international foreign policy relations. So therefore, they cannot do it. Even if Turkey wanted to do so, with respect to the war issue, it would have created a lot of problems for Turkey and Baghdad as well, just like it did in the case of oil. Thanks.
Thank you very much.